Hello, people! Anex here to talk to you today about A Little Hatred, which, to clarify, is a book by Joe Abercrombie and not my feelings about 2020. This is the first book in a new trilogy called The Age of Madness, which is set a few decades after the events of the First Law. If you're one of the 3 people who've been following this channel from the beginning, then you will know that the first book in the series, The Blade itself, was the first book I ever reviewed all those 3 months ago. It was that book, or more specifically that trilogy, which inspired me to start this channel. Those 3 books are some of my favourite fantasy of all time. I read the 3 standalones afterwards as well, and they were pretty good, but they didn't engage me like the trilogy. I'm saying all of this to make a point. After reading Little Hatred, I'll say, without a doubt, this first book is better than that trilogy. Because god damn it, it's such a good book. So let's do a 7-point review. If you're unfamiliar with this format, I've split this review into 7 broad, vague categories. The first 3 of these categories are non-spoiler thoughts on the book for those of you who haven't read it yet, and the next 4 are full-on spoiler discussions for those of you who have. Without further ado, number 1, the characters. And I promise I'm going to say something different about them this time. At the risk of sounding like a broken record repeating myself, Joe Abercrombie writes really good characters. I've talked about why they're so good in my videos about the other books. To be honest, most of the great things about this book are things that he's done well in the earlier books, and he's just done it even better here. So watch those videos for even more praise of the series. But in A Little Hatred, he's done something with the characters that I didn't really notice in the earlier books. He's got 6 point of view or POV characters in this book. They're all well developed, 3-dimensional, morally grey, realistic, blah blah blah. But the neat thing is how he's paired up these characters, and I don't mean literally. Let's take an example. So we've got Orso, my favourite character, who is the Crown Prince of the Union and the son of my ex-favourite character, Giselle. Then there is Leo, who is the son of my favourite character from the Heroes, Finri Dambrock. To me, these characters are paired up in the story, if that's the right word to use, by their polar opposite characterizations, beliefs, motivations, actions, behaviour, etc, etc. I think the same goes for the other 4 characters in the book as well, but I can't reveal what those pairings are without going into spoilers. This technique is so brilliant because it gives us even more insight into both of the characters in the pairing. Having another POV that's that polar opposite makes each of these characters even more distinct and memorable. They also allow for great scenes of dialogue and interactions between characters. Above everything though, they make the last 50 to 100 pages of this book some of the best scenes of dialogue I've ever enjoyed reading. It's a clear sign that Abercrombie is always improving at his craft, even in aspects of the story that you could argue he's some of the best at. Number 2, the Industrialized World. Because I need to stop saying world building every time. I'm gonna be honest with you, this isn't the most creative world building in fantasy. The original trilogy took place in sort of the late Middle Ages, but it's been a few decades and the world has moved on. Most of the story takes place in Adua and the central part of the Union, which is going through a bit of an industrial revolution. If you know anything about the British Industrial Revolution, this is pretty much that. You have factories with underpaid poor people working with dangerous machines, the cities are filled with smoke from the factories, you have children going up chimneys, etc. Meanwhile, there's the rich inventors and the investors making all the money. Reading all of this made me wonder something, and I'm probably not the first person to say this, but is the Union basically just United Kingdom? Think about it. Adwa feels a lot like London, which would make the North and Anglan into Scotland, and I would assume geographically that would mean Styria is mainland Europe. Does that make any sense, or am I just talking complete nonsense? Tell me in the comments. The point is, if you want to get lost in a brand new world that's nothing like ours, this won't give you that. Then again, you can argue that a lot of fantasy is just medieval Europe, and those are still immersive. This is just that, but in a different period of European history. Personally, I didn't mind the industrialization too much. The 6 POV characters come from various parts of this extremely unequal society, which still allows for an immersive world that you can get lost in. The multiple angles of POV in this industrial world also forms a good basis for some great discussions we can have about things that are reflected in our world, like the wealth gap, inequality, pollution, revolutions, etc. And anyway, unique worlds with deep laws were never what drew me to Joe Abercrombie in the first place. So this isn't a personal deal breaker, just something for you to bear in mind. Number 3, the prose. Not sure I know what that word means. I feel like this is something that's very underappreciated with Abercrombie's work, and it's something I appreciated much more once I read fantasy in wider genres. His writing is so sharp. There isn't a single chapter in the book that I was bored by or thought was unnecessary. There wasn't a single interaction or plot point that I felt was wasted. Everything is either building character or moving the story forward, and some of the more brilliant chapters do both. The dialogue is so enjoyably witty as well, but I can't quote any of it because YouTube hates that sort of language. For a lot of the characters, I started reading their lines half out loud, and to me, that's when I know it's written well. It sounds like realistic dialogue, but also individual to the person saying it. The dialogue immerses you in the story even more. For the Blade itself, one criticism thrown at it is the lack of a story. It doesn't have a plot. It was just some great characters that do some stuff until they all come together to set off on a quest. This one isn't like that, for the most part. The book starts with action and it follows that story thread all the way through. The story structure isn't what you're expecting though. At least it didn't follow any of my predicted paths. For the multiple, occasionally interconnected storylines introduced, I tried to imagine how they would go and I was wrong on almost every count. The story is full of surprises and it keeps you engaged all the way through. I'll talk more in the spoiler section with examples of this, but all I can say for now is I am so glad Trouble with Peace is coming out in a few days. I can't wait to find out what happens next. That's it for the non-spoiler section of this video. Basically, other than the stuff I've already mentioned, this book does everything great that the other 6 do, but better. It's a massive step up from the first Law trilogy, and that's saying something. The sequel, Trouble with Peace, is coming out in a few days, and I would highly recommend everyone to check this out before you read that. I'll be reading and reviewing the sequel for sure. Before we move on, if you haven't already, make sure you smash that subscribe button and like this video so that you can catch all the future fantasy and non-fantasy reviews coming up. Leave a comment telling me what other books you want me to review as well. The rest of this video will be spoiler filled for those of you who have read the book. In 3, 2, 1. Number 4. The Character Pairings. This time with spoilers. So I talked about this at the start, but let's discuss this in detail this time. The obviously linked pair is Orso and Leo. They have pretty much the exact opposite personalities, and it was fun switching back and forth between their situations. The ways that they dealt with their respective fights couldn't have been more different. Once I realized this was a pairing, I started wondering, are there more of these? I was trying to figure out who Savine was paired up with, but I didn't get it till towards the end. Let's talk about Savine for a second. She was the most fun character at the start because of how awesomely in control she was of everything. She could manipulate anyone, she was smart and resourceful, and she was Glockter's daughter. But not really. By the way, what a shock that was! I knew that Ardi was pregnant at the end of the first Law, but I didn't really put it together until she said it. I'm just glad that she had the appropriate reaction to finding out that Orso was her half-brother. So, okay, Savine was at the top of her game at the beginning. That sort of character is fun, but not the most interesting. Maybe it's sadistic, but I was so happy to see her go through all of that suffering in Valbec. It gives her dimensions. She was now more than just a cold, calculating, uncaring investor. It also allowed for her to be a perfect comparison character against Ricky, Dogman's daughter. Okay, back to the pairings. For most of the book, I thought this was just an interesting style of character work that Abercrombie was using. I didn't realize their purpose until the end, when the 4 characters meet. It's always great to see Abercrombie's POV characters interact because they're so well realized. But when they're also linked thematically and personality-wise like Orso and Leo and Savine and Rick, it takes those interactions to another level. Like I said in the first half, Abercrombie's character work has risen to masterful levels, and this is only book 1. It took 3 books to see the full extent of Logan and Giselle and Glockter. I can't wait to see what we get from these lot by the end of the 3 books. Number 5. The plot structure. Maybe plot structure isn't the best word to describe this, but I basically want to talk about the structure of the plot. Maybe it is the right word. So here's the thing. I didn't really know what to expect from the story of this book going in. I assumed it would be like The Blade itself. You know, introduce a bunch of characters, set up the world, but no plot in the first book. That wasn't the case here. The 3 main story threads that were introduced at the start of the book pretty much got resolved by the end, which was nice because I appreciated the feeling of having read a whole story. At the same time, just enough mysteries were left unsolved and questions unanswered to tell you that this is only the first book in a trilogy. There is still 2 more books of story to be told before everything wraps up. Also, here was something else that was quite surprising to me. The end of the book wasn't where I thought it would be. I thought the war with the North would happen at the end of the book. But no, it happened pretty quickly. I thought the duel would happen at the end of the book. But no, it happened pretty quickly. I thought the revolution of the city would happen by the end of the book. But no, it happened about halfway. I thought Orso would take the city back at the end of the book. But no, that happened pretty quickly as well. Abercrombie kept skipping all the potentially boring stuff to jump to the exciting action every time. That's why I said earlier that every chapter felt important. There was no section of the book that felt unnecessary. This structure for a book could have made it feel rushed, but Abercrombie managed to pull it off. I didn't feel like I was missing anything. There was just enough to delve into the minds of these characters to understand the significance of these events before the events happened. My one criticism about this though is that I didn't get a feel for the passage of time. There was a couple mentions to it in the book, but I don't know if this whole story took place over the course of a few weeks, a few months, was it over a year? If you know, then please tell me in the comments. Number 6. Specific chapters. One I loved and one not so much. Right. Confession time. I read most of the Abercrombie books as ebooks. I know, physical books are better and ebooks can never replace paper, and I get it. But it's the pandemic, libraries are closed, and I don't buy books, I generally just borrow them, so I had to settle for borrowing ebooks. The point is, when I'm reading on my phone, at the start of every chapter, it tells me how many pages are left in that chapter. Reading 6 other Abercrombie books this way has taught me a lesson. Most of his chapters are short to medium length, and this is where most of the story happens. But a few times in each book, there'll be a much longer chapter, and when you get to those, you know something is about to go down. Those are usually the best parts of these books, and the same is true for A Little Hatred. I want to talk about 2 specific chapters in this book. The first is the chapter in Valbeck after the Breakers and the Burners take the city. There's over half a dozen POV switches in that chapter between characters that we only see in that chapter. These POVs switch between the rich and the poor as we move through the city to show you the full effect of the revolution. He used a similar technique in The Heroes to describe a battle as well. That chapter was so good. It showed just how different the world views of the people on the different sides are. The poor people wanted more freedoms and more opportunities, but they weren't all united in this attack. This wasn't what a lot of them wanted. A lot of the rich couldn't even understand why they were being targeted. They had done nothing wrong. They'd given jobs to these savages. That single chapter is the best part of the book when it comes to exploring the themes of the story. It's also amazing how quickly Abercrombie can build a full character to give a good POV within like a handful of pages. The other chapter is the duel between the young lion and the great wolf. Ever since I read the Logan and Fenris duel in Last Argument of Kings, I get really excited when they're about to happen. Because of the interesting matchups, they're a great way to build up energy and excitement, and they're full of tension. This one was a bit different because Ricky already told us who was going to win. That's kind of annoying to me because I'm not a fan of prophecies. Don't get me wrong, I like the parts of her power that allowed her to dodge an arrow. That was awesome. But prophecies remove tension because I already knew that Leo was going to win even though he was the weaker fighter. The chapter was another great example of POV switches, and I still think it was written really well, but I was hoping that her prophecy would be wrong and Leo would lose. I want a POV character to lose the duel for once because it hasn't happened yet and is starting to become predictable. Number 7. Dramatic irony. The one thing I remember from studying an Inspector course in English. So let's talk about some returning characters. Giselle was my favourite character until I got to know Orso, and now he's my new favourite. I was happy to see Giselle back, but it's so tragic to see how he's still affected by what happened in the Last Argument of Kings. His terror of Bias is still palpable and his heartbreak over Artie is still depressing, and I was so angry that Bias killed him. That is what happened, right? Bias decided that he was no longer useful and just got rid of him? That guy annoys me so much. Every time he shows up, it's like a constant reminder that none of this matters and all of this is just a massive chess game that he's playing against Zacharias, and now it looks like he's won. I just really wish someone would just put a sword through his heart. The other one I want to mention is Glockter. Is it just me, or does he seem nicer now? He was never an evil guy, but he seems to have mellowed in old age. Then again, most of the chapters we see him in is when he's with Sabine, and he's probably just being nice to his daughter. The point I wanted to make with these returning characters is similar to what I said in Best Served Cold. Dramatic irony. Abercrombie used this technique in Best Served Cold when Monza is talking to Giselle, but it's used in even more abundance here. We know much more about the secondary characters in this book than the POVs, so every scene with those characters in it has an extra level of meaning for the reader. We know the truth that these POV characters are not aware of. For example, unlike Orso and Sabine, we know that the real power in the Union is Bias. Or when Leo says that he wants to be like his heroes in the circle, like Logan Ninefingers, we know what that guy is really like. It enriched the story so much for me because I read the other books so recently, so every storyline with Ghost and Finri and Dogman and Glockter and Giselle was so vivid in my mind. I'm curious, was there anyone who read this book before the other 6, or maybe read the standalones first? If you did, then let me know in the comments what that was like. Were you confused at any point? I feel like I would have been, but maybe not. This is the best book Abercrombie has written, and that's high praise. I'm so looking forward to reading Trouble with Peace because I have no idea what to expect. That is what I will be picking up next week. In the meantime, I've just finished Rage of Dragons today, and oh, I have some thoughts about that. So review of Rage of Dragons coming up soon. Also in the coming weeks, I'll be picking up The Poppy Wars by Rebecca F. Kwong and The Stormlight Archives by Brandon Sanderson. So Make sure you smash that subscribe button to catch my reviews for all of those books. In the meantime, like and share this video, check out all the links in the description. Anything else you want to discuss about this book? Let's do it in the comments. Till next week, see ya!